Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett, and today I'm going to read chapter 25 from Seven Sisters, The Trek. It's the third leg of the journey to Utah. After the day of packing and preparing for the departure the next morning, the Dixie Train Company was to meet on the hillside in one of the Boweries to receive their final instructions. "I can't believe we will be leaving tomorrow for the valley," Lavinia said as she and her sisters climbed up the hill to the Bowery. "To be very truthful with you," said Caroline, "I'm very nervous about driving our wagon." "We can all learn how to do it and each take our turns," Eleanor reassured. "I thought they weren't going to leave until the brothers of the cattle drive got here," Caroline said with a waver in her voice. "Maybe they got lost," Fanny suggested. "Maybe they got stopped by troops and were drafted into the army," said Phoebe. Susanna began to tear up. "You two aren't making me feel very hopeful. Maybe you should just keep quiet for a while." The twins didn't realize they had said anything wrong, but they could see they needed to keep still. Susanna had been very emotional the last few days. Her mind was far away. "Don't cry," Eleanor said, putting her arms around Susanna. "We will be all right." "I can't help it. We've been through so much since we left the Pride of the West, and I need Marcus back here with me. I miss him so much," she said, sobbing on Eleanor's shoulder, while the sisters surrounded her and patted her back. Then Eleanor spied a figure coming up the hill toward them. A big smile spread over her face, and she silently motioned for her sisters to move away. Susanna was so wrapped up in her crying that she didn't even notice when the sisters left her alone in Eleanor's arms. Eleanor touched her finger to her lips as if to say, "Don't say a word, sisters," and pointed at the man approaching them. The sisters turned to see what Eleanor was pointing at. Climbing up the hill before them was Marcus, back from the cattle drive. They could hardly contain themselves and put their hands over their mouths to keep from emitting any noise. However, Susanna's earnest weeping drowned out any escaped sounds of joy. Marcus touched each sister's hand noiselessly as he passed by them and moved toward Susanna, who was sobbing freely. The sisters wondered what he would say. Finally, he opened his mouth and surprised them all by singing, "Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee." At this, Susanna turned around, and when she comprehended that Marcus was truly standing in front of her, she let out a high-pitched scream and ran to him. "Oh, Marcus, you're here! You're here! You made it!" Marcus scooped her up and twirled her around as he laughed. "Yes, I'm here." The sisters clapped their hands and hugged each other. They were so happy for Susanna. "We'll go on ahead," Susanna said. "Eleanor, I'm sure you two have lots to talk about." Eleanor, Aunt Lucy, and Caroline walked away arm in arm, and the twins each grabbed one of Lavinia's hands as they made their way to the Bowery. "Let's skip, Mummy," said Phoebe. "Yes, let's skip, twinsies," said Lavinia, remembering that, yes, she knew how to skip. Realizing they were alone, Marcus ventured, "May I have permission to kiss you, Sister Watts?" Susanna was glowing. "You certainly may, Elder Fielding." He kissed her lips softly and hugged her tightly. "I missed you so much. You'll have to tell me all about your voyage up the Missouri on the Saluda." Susanna pulled back. "You mean you haven't heard about the Saluda?" "No, what happened?" he said with wonder. "I didn't talk to anyone when I got here. I just helped put the cattle in the corrals and came straightway to find you." "Oh, Marcus, it was so dreadful," she said, starting to cry again. "You mean the captain? The crew?" No. The Saluda blew up in Lexington." "What? I can't believe it. How did you survive?" Susanna pulled Marcus over to a tree, and they sat down on the grass. She told him the whole story. Tears of gratitude welled up in Marcus's eyes. "President Pinkerton promised that if I accepted the call to drive the cattle to Florence, you and the twins would be preserved on the Saluda, and I would be reunited with you in Florence as though we had never been separated." "That was truly a prophetic promise," she said. "Yes, and because of it, I had real peace of mind during the entire cattle drive. All I thought about was you. I conjured up dreams of what our life together would be like when we reached Zion. I don't think I could have borne my worry if someone had brought us the news on the drive, and I had to wonder whether or not you and the twins had died in the explosion." He sat with his back against the tree and wrapped his arms around her. She leaned back on his shoulder. as they looked up at the flickering lights of the many campfires under the stars. They only had a few minutes before the prayer meeting started. They were reluctant to leave this lovely scene that was equally as beautiful as the starry night on the becalmed Amazon, and the fireflies on their first night of sleeping under the stars in Albany. They had experienced many special moments in their journey, but being back together after their untimely separation felt better than any of them. Captain MacArthur's neatly trimmed black beard, stout chest, and black suit gave him an imposing look as he stood before the saints. He was definitely in charge. Brothers and sisters, welcome to our meeting on this last evening of our time here in Florence. We're so glad President Larkin and his cowpokes caught up with us from their cattle drive. We wondered if you got lost on your way here, President, but here you are. We are pleased to have you and the stock you purchased with us, and might I take this opportunity to call you to be a captain of 10 for the remainder of our journey to the valley. I will be happy to accept that calling, Captain MacArthur, he said. We are also calling the following men to be captains along with Captain Larkin: George Careless, Marcus Fielding, Hugh Clotworthy, and John Pinkerton. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. The saints did so. Are there any opposed? None dissented. Thank you, Captain. Now, brothers and sisters, I can see you are all anxious to get started on our trek tomorrow, and I can't say as I blame you. I'm also anxious to get our Dixie train headed back to Utah on the Mormon Trail. As he spoke, Captain MacArthur was thinking in his mind about the first time he crossed the plains with his family in 1848. The trail wasn't as well defined as it is now, and the wagons weren't as well made as the down and back wagons were. Also, the leaders weren't as sure of what they were doing. It was a very long, drawn-out experience, and he was sure if he were ever in charge of a wagon train that he could shave several days off the journey. He had calculated everything and wanted to be the leader that set a record for the shortest number of days taken to arrive in Salt Lake City. He had discussed this with his teamsters many times around their nightly campfires on their way to Florence. He didn't plan on telling the saints of his plan to push them, but push them he would. Brothers and sisters, let's begin our meeting tonight by singing Our Mountain Home So Dear. Then Brother Brown will give our opening prayer. The saints were so excited and nervous about what lay ahead of them that they could literally feel the spirit of the gathering well up inside them as they sang. They were all transported as they sang the hymn, which gave them bright hope for the future. It really painted a beautiful picture of Zion, but would it be that beautiful? After the prayer, Captain MacArthur continued with his agenda. I want to say a few things before I turn the time over to Captain Andrews and the captains of 10 for some last-minute trail instructions. As some of you may know, I first crossed these plains with Brigham Young in the second company he led in 1848 and settled in the Salt Lake Valley. Then in 1856, I got called to a mission in the East, and on my way back, I was called upon to lead the second handcart company of Utah using that new mode of transportation. What a spiritual time that was, brothers and sisters. And now I've been called to come up from Dixie to head up this down and back wagon train to bring you good saints back to Zion. I've experienced many things on the trail, and you're going to see and experience things you've never seen or even imagined before. As we get closer to the Rocky Mountains, you will see some beautiful scenery, but I'm afraid the landscape between here and there is very barren and tedious to travel. You might not see a tree for hundreds of miles, just prairie dogs, greasewood, and sagebrush. Phoebe whispered to her sisters, that must be why they call it the plains, because it's so plain for so many miles. The sisters chuckled at Phoebe's play on words. Captain MacArthur went on. There will be problems as you travel. There will be the problem of privacy for the purpose of elimination. What's elimination? Asked Fanny. Shh, I'll tell you later, said Susanna, hoping no one heard her question. MacArthur could see some of the sisters were turning a little red, but he continued. It was something they needed to know. The common rule will be men to the right of the train and women to the left. And if that isn't enough privacy for you sisters, I've seen several sisters stand in a circle with their skirts spread wide to provide a privacy screen for each other. The men smirked a bit, but brought themselves back to seriousness. At night, you can use your chamber pots, he said. Oh, I get it, said Phoebe, looking at Fanny and giggling. I've never heard of elimination before, laughed Fanny. There will be hardships as you walk, but we stop often enough that it won't be that physically trying. I might mention that we will call the roll twice a day. We don't want anyone wandering off, and we don't want to leave anyone behind by accident. You'll be living out in the weather, and that can be anywhere from pleasant to hot to very cold at night, to windy and dusty to rainy, and we hope and pray we won't get snowed on before we get to our destination, like the Willie and Martin handcart companies experienced. You will have breakdowns, accidents, and face danger crossing rivers. Sometimes you will cross the river several times in the same river several times in one day. If the river is deep, you might have to hang onto the back of the wagon and let the oxen take you across while you paddle your feet. Anything can happen crossing a river. One company lost their wagon in a river when it fell into a hole and threw the father into the swift water. He and both oxen drowned. So please don't think crossing a river can't be dangerous, because it can. The parents in the company started to look anxious. I'm sorry to tell you these heart-wrenching stories, brothers and sisters, but it's better to tell them to you than tell them about you. An uneasy chuckle followed. Because we are leaving Florence this late in the season, and because we will need to reach the valley before the winter snows set in, we will be traveling on Sundays. But we hope our nightly prayer meetings will give us the spiritual lift we need each day. Sometimes we will have to lay by for a day or two because of drenching rainstorms or other unforeseen problems. And on those days, we will try to have a sacrament meeting to strengthen us and help us renew our baptismal covenants with our Heavenly Father. Brothers and sisters, let me be frank. Some of your family members might not make it to Zion because of an accident or contracting a sickness and dying on the journey. But William Clayton's beautiful hymn gave us solace. And should we die before our journey's through, happy day, all is well. We then are free from toil and sorrow too. With the just we shall dwell. But if our lives are spared again to see the saints their rest obtain, oh, how we'll make this chorus swell. All is well, all is well. Heads of families started to fidget. Reality was setting in. Captain MacArthur continued unabashed. Brothers and sisters, Mormon wagon trains do not escape the trials other wagon trains have. We are each tested and tried in a variety of ways, and you must endure the adversities that will surely beset each and every one of you. You will not escape the refiner's fire on this trek. Just remember, we have the gospel as our foundation and our elder brother, Jesus Christ, as our beacon to guide, comfort, and support us as we stay faithful and true to the principles of the gospel. If each one of you will follow the rules of the company and seek the counsel of your parents and your priesthood leaders, and if you have a cheerful spirit and not a grumbling spirit, this experience will be a defining moment in your lives. I can't say it will be easy, but it shouldn't have to be drudgery either. Some of you have asked me about the danger of Indians. You're going to see Indians as you travel. They are the descendants of the Lamanites in the Book of Mormon. We want you to treat these people as our friends and brothers and sisters. All of God's children are our brothers and sisters. The tribes we will encounter on our journey are, for the most part, friendly to us. Mormons are, for the most part, friendly to us Mormons because we treat them with respect and trade and share our food with them when they ask for it. They know we are just passing through and don't plan to settle on their lands. But I must tell you this, the Indians have become emboldened this summer because the United States government has called so many of its soldiers back from the forts out west to help fight in the Civil War. They have left their forts with a minimum number of soldiers to protect the settlers and the passing wagon trains, so the Indians are starting to cause trouble. We will have to be vigilant in guarding our wagons and livestock at night. We must stay together and not spread out too far when we are traveling. We didn't have any hostile any hostile run-ins on our way out here in May, but it's been a couple of months, and things may be different as we pass through their lands on our way back to Utah. Another concern on the plains are the huge herds of bison, or buffalo as they are commonly called. You will encounter hundreds, even thousands of these noble creatures on your trek. The threat of stampede by these animals is very real, so obey your captains and the teamsters. Many of our teamsters are young men, but don't let their ages fool you. They are very experienced and can handle the cattle and wagons efficiently and effectively. They can get you safely to the valley, so please listen and learn from them. The teamsters, who were standing in the back of the saints, all raised their hats or hands and yelled, "Hear, hear." Then they laughed heartily, and the saints joined their sudden vocal outburst with clapping. The young girls in the company had been eyeing the Utah boys ever since they arrived at the meeting. The boys in turn had been sizing up the young girls. The adults noticed there were lots of smiles going on during the meeting. They hoped the teamsters would be more gentlemanly than some of the coarse, ill-mannered men they had encountered since leaving Castle Garden. Before I turn the rest of my time over to Captain Andrews, I want to conduct one piece of business. The Dixie train has brought its own horn player from St. George, Brother Eli Hopkins from Pengwich. So we want to extend a release to Brother Matthew Geddes and thank him for his trumpet service ever since the Amazon left England's shore. All in favor of expressing your thanks to Brother Geddes, please raise your right hand. Matthew smiled and nodded shyly. He suddenly felt a huge load of responsibility lifted from his shoulders. He had done most of the trumpeting on the ship, not so much on the overland journey, but he always had to be available to the leaders so he could blow the horn the right commands at the right times. Now he was free to come and go as he wanted and could enjoy being with his friends. But since it was second nature for him to carry his horn at all times, he would still wear it over his shoulder. He liked to have it handy so he could doodle on it sometimes. "Now I'm going to turn the rest of my time over to Captain Andrews," said Captain MacArthur. James Andrews from Lavercan, near St. George, was the assistant captain in charge of the train. As he strode confidently forward, the saints could see that he was not an average-looking man. His face and hands were thickly covered with reddish-brown freckles, and his shock of red hair and mutton-chop sideburns definitely set him apart in a crowd. The saints wondered what he would say. They would soon find out. "Brothers and sisters, I want to say something about stampedes and Indians." The saints tittered a little when they heard his high-pitched voice. "If the cattle are stampeded, how will you reach Salt Lake City? And if your scalp is lifted, where are you going then?" The saints' smiles disappeared. They were aghast at this blunt statement. Captain Andrews certainly wasn't sugarcoating what he said, or being very reassuring to the group like Captain MacArthur had been. He didn't realize that his frank talk was scaring the children. Some of them began to whimper and start to ask questions of their parents. Captain Andrews pushed on. "And I want to say something directly to the children. We hope you will help us on this trek by minding your parents and keeping out from underfoot. Don't get too close to the oxen or wagons, or you'll get stepped on or rolled over. We don't want anybody getting squished." Parents couldn't believe how Andrews was scaring the younger children. They were about ready to protest. We also ask you to gather sticks along the way to help with starting the nightly campfires. And when we get into buffalo country, you will need to gather dried buffalo chips if wood is scarce, which it will be at times. "What are buffalo chips?" one of the young Jobson boys asked his mother loud enough for Andrews to hear. "Buffalo chips are what fall out of a buffalo's rear end into little round piles on the ground. Just make sure you pick up the dried ones, 'cause the gooey ones don't burn very well." At this, everyone burst out laughing, which eased the tension Andrews was causing. But now the parents became worried about what would come out of Captain Andrews' mouth next. He got somewhat more serious. "In a minute or two, we will let the captains of 10 meet with you families and give them some last-minute instructions about what will happen tomorrow morning. But I do have a directive from President Brigham Young to be read to all the companies before they leave Florence." He unfolded a paper drawn from his inside coat pocket and read, "Swearing, drunkenness, gambling, contention, and unreasonable whipping or abuse of cattle will not be allowed. Troublemakers will be turned out of the company. All men in the company should keep their guns and ammunition in good condition for use at a moment's notice. The saints were a bit perplexed by this announcement. They never thought such things as drunkenness and gambling would ever be a problem on a Mormon wagon train. Sir Evelyn squirmed in his seat. He pretty much swore, loved his drink, and gambled every chance he got. And he had just been caught abusing an ox. These Mormons had a lot of rules. The saints finally concluded that there must have been a problem in the past, or the leaders wouldn't be warning against it now. In particular, the warning to keep their guns and ammunition ready for use at a moment's notice made the saints wonder just how safe this journey was going to be. Captain Andrews soon cleared everything up. This letter is what you call an ounce of prevention, brothers and sisters, which, as you know, is better than a pound of cure. We sometimes have people not of our faith who travel along with us, and we need to spell out our moral code, our moral conduct for them. The saints felt relieved all of a sudden. Captain Andrews may have had a brash way about him, but he had good common sense and came directly to the point. They guessed they could live with his leadership. However, Sir Evelyn felt a little picked on. It was as if Andrews was reading that letter just for his benefit. Andrews concluded his part of the meeting. Brothers and sisters, you are now dismissed to find your captains of 10. The 7 sisters had again been placed as a family along with 9 other families, which included the Devereaux, the Clotworthys, the Jobsons, the Buttons, the Geddeses, Sister Schneider, the sisters-in-law, the Dibbles, and 3 families that had joined them from the Synosure. The captain of 10 assigned over them was President Pinkerton, now referred to as Captain Pinkerton. It would be hard to train their minds to call him captain. Brothers and sisters, said Captain Pinkerton, I just have a few things to tell you before we break up and return to our tents. Tomorrow we will go through the same routine we will follow every day we are on the plains. The wake-up horn will sound at 5:30. After your wake-up call, you need to say your individual prayers, get dressed, and get your tent and belongings all secured in your wagons. The teamsters and the designated men from your group will round up and yoke your cattle and hitch them to each of your wagons. The sisters need to prepare food for their families and have it ready for when the men have finished their work. We should be ready to pull out by 8 o'clock. Then there will be walking, and more walking. Everyone smiled knowingly. We're all in this together, brothers and sisters, so let's help each other whenever we can. Get a good night's rest, everybody. Brother Devereaux, would you please say the closing prayer? And that's the end of chapter 25. Over and out.